When you stop asking, "Why am I not disciplined enough?" and start building something that works even when you don't feel like it, the game changes completely. There is a level of discipline that makes other people uncomfortable just being around you, not because you act superior, not because you brag about your achievements, but because your presence exposes their procrastination. You don't need to say a word. You don't need to preach. Simply showing up consistently every single day is enough to make many people pull away. True discipline doesn't inspire admiration at first, it creates pressure. You're not better than others because you're smarter or luckier. You're different in one way. You don't stop. While most people burn bright with motivation for a few days and then fade out, you keep moving, quietly. When they quit in the second week, you're still there, doing the work in silence. When they look for excuses to delay, you show up, on time, on task, on rhythm. No emotional highs, no flashy promises, just repeated action, day after day. That's what truly frightens people, because you become a mirror reflecting their lack of discipline. You prove that the problem isn't circumstances, it's who's willing to go all the way. You show that success isn't a dramatic breakthrough moment, but the outcome of relentless consistency with yourself. But this isn't ordinary discipline, not force, not depleted willpower, and certainly not temporary inspiration. This is an ancient system from Japanese Zen, where people don't rely on motivation, but on practice. A path refined over centuries, where action matters more than emotion, and repetition matters more than words. That system is called gyoji, self-sustaining practice. It means doing the work simply because it is the work that must be done. No need for praise, no need for recognition, no audience required. Each day you show up as a ritual. Each small action is done with full presence. You don't ask, "Should I?" You only ask, "Is it time?" When you live by gyoji, discipline stops being a burden. It becomes identity. You don't try to be strong. You act like a strong person. And it is that quiet, steady, unshakable consistency that makes others hesitate. Not because you are frightening, but because you cannot be broken. If this video brought you value, please like it, share it with someone who needs it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content.
Chapter 1. The Awakening. The problem isn't willpower. Awakening doesn't come from an emotional explosion. It comes from a raw truth you're forced to face. The biggest problem of modern humans is not willpower. It's the way we fundamentally misunderstand ourselves. Raphael is a textbook example. He's intelligent, educated, professionally stable, someone people describe as full of potential. Yet for years, one paradox haunted him. He couldn't sustain any habit long enough to create real change. Not because he lacked ability, but because every attempt collapsed in the same frighteningly familiar pattern. Monday always started on fire. Raphael woke up early, crafted the perfect plan, convinced that this time would be different. Motivation surged, giving him the sense of control. But by midweek, a familiar voice crept in. "I'm a bit tired today. I'll make it up tomorrow." A quiet negotiation began in his mind. No drama, no negativity, just reasonable-sounding arguments. Then the weekend arrived and everything fell apart. The habit was abandoned, the plan shelved, disappointment layered on top of old disappointment. The cycle repeated, month after month, year after year. Raphael wasn't lazy. He tried everything modern society recommends. Habit tracking apps where each checkmark delivered a brief hit of victory. Rewards, promising himself treats for consistency. Accountability partners, reminders from friends, even hiring a coach. All of it failed. Not instantly, but slowly and silently until nothing was left to hold on to. That's when awakening began. The real cause wasn't a lack of discipline, it was the structure of the human brain. The brain is wired to conserve energy, seek shortcuts, and negotiate whenever discomfort appears. It doesn't distinguish between danger and inconvenience. To the brain, sustaining a new habit that costs energy is something to avoid, just like a threat. Willpower was never designed for constant use. It's like a battery, strong at first, then gradually drained. The more you rely on willpower, the faster you burn out. The harder you force yourself, the cleverer your brain pushes back with refined excuses. That's why intelligent people often lose the battle with themselves. They have too many good arguments. Here's the brutal but liberating truth. You don't fail because you're weak. You fail because you're using the wrong tool. Willpower is suited for short-term decisions, not long-term change. Once you understand this, you stop blaming yourself and begin searching for another path, a system that doesn't negotiate, doesn't depend on emotion, and doesn't wear down over time.
Chapter 2. The Secret of Zen Masters. Irreversible Commitment. The secret of Zen masters isn't supernatural ability, it's irreversible commitment. For centuries, Japanese monasteries have operated on a principle that seems simple, yet is brutally strict. Ryoji, uninterrupted practice. Since around the year 1200, every day at exactly 3:30 a.m., the bell rings. Not earlier, not later. No exceptions, no space for personal feelings. When the bell rings, monks wake up. There is no question of should I do it today. No negotiation, no mood check, no need for motivation. Action happens like a reflex, not because they are stronger than ordinary people, but because they have eliminated choice itself, and that is where power is born. Modern neuroscience explains this clearly. The brain recognizes two types of commitments. The first is reversible commitment. Let's see how I feel. I'll rest if I'm tired. I can make it up tomorrow. Each one opens the door to negotiation, and when negotiation appears, the brain, designed to conserve energy, wins. The second is irreversible commitment. These are actions that happen automatically, without thought, like brushing your teeth or stopping at a red light. You don't ask whether you should, you just do it. Zen masters placed practice into this second category. Once it's there, willpower becomes unnecessary. Even more important is the shift in identity. Zen monks don't see themselves as people trying to meditate. They are meditators. Action is no longer effort, it's the natural expression of who they are. Identity drives behavior, not the other way around. And that identity is reinforced daily under the witness of the community. Public commitment is the missing piece. When a monk enters a monastery, he doesn't just promise himself, he promises the collective. Quitting isn't merely personal failure, it's an identity collapse. The cost of stopping becomes far greater than the discomfort of continuing. Raphael learned this lesson and applied it to modern life. He stopped setting vague goals. He wrote a clear, unambiguous statement. I am a person who meditates for 20 minutes every day at 5 a.m. for 90 days. No trying, no when I have time. A new identity was declared. He made it public. Friends, colleagues, family, all knew. From that moment on, quitting was no longer private. The shame of breaking his word became far more painful than the fatigue of sitting down to meditate. And that reversal changed everything.
Chapter 3. The Inner War. Eliminating when. The hardest battle in life isn't fought in society. It's fought silently every morning, every evening, every moment before you begin. It's the battle with hesitation, with procrastination disguised as reasonable logic. Let's see, when would be a better time? That seemingly harmless question drains mental energy before action even begins. Every day, the brain processes hundreds of small decisions, and among them, deciding when is one of the most dangerous energy leaks. Morning or evening, after eating or before bed, wait for motivation or start now. You haven't done anything yet, but you're already exhausted from thinking. This isn't laziness, it's decision fatigue. When mental energy is depleted, action has no room to emerge. Disciplined people aren't stronger than you. They simply make fewer decisions. They don't ask when, they've locked the time in advance. Raphael chose 5 a.m., not because it's perfect, not because science says it's optimal, but because it's fixed and non-negotiable. The power of a fixed time is that it kills procrastination at the root. When the clock hits 5, the brain loses the right to negotiate. No variable called when. No internal debate dragging on for 20 minutes. Action is triggered like a reflex. No motivation, no inspiration required. At first, the body resists. The first week is pushback, fatigue, heaviness, discomfort. You'll think you chose the wrong time, but the truth is, the body is relearning its rhythm. In the second week, something strange happens. The body begins preparing in advance. You get sleepier earlier. You wake up alert at the right moment. Less force is required. After about 14 days, a critical threshold is crossed. Action begins before conscious thought catches up. You stand up before you can think. You begin before doubt has time to speak. At this point, discipline is no longer strain, it's instinct. This is the secret few people realize. Discipline isn't built on willpower, but on structure. When you eliminate the question of when, you free massive mental energy for what actually matters, doing the work. You don't need motivation every day, you just need a non-negotiable time slot. The inner war doesn't end when you defeat emotion. It ends when emotion no longer has decision-making power. The winner is the one who decided yesterday, so today, all that's left is execution. No delay, no hesitation, just repeated action day after day until it becomes who you are.
Chapter 4. A Single Path. Eliminating what to do. Once when has been eliminated, the inner battle isn't over yet. A more subtle door immediately opens. What should I do today? It sounds harmless, even productive, but that very variety is quietly eroding your discipline day by day. Not because you lack determination, but because you're allowing your brain to negotiate too much. The danger of variety lies here. Every small choice is a crack. This workout or that one. Read a book or listen to a podcast. Meditate or journal. Each question is like a tiny leak. One leak doesn't matter, but enough of them will drain discipline dry. You think you're being flexible, but in reality, you're inviting procrastination inside. The human brain doesn't love discipline, but it loves familiarity. When faced with too many options, it looks for the path that costs the least energy, and that path is often doing nothing at all. That's why the most consistent people aren't the ones who do many things, but the ones who walk a single path, repeated every day. The solution isn't more motivation. The solution is to lock down the entire process. One morning, one fixed sequence of actions, 20 push-ups, 10 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes of reading. No more, no less. Fixed order, fixed duration, no changes. When you no longer have to think about what comes next, the brain is forced into execution mode. The early phase won't feel good. Weeks 3 to 4 are usually when resistance peaks. You'll feel bored, pointless, even doubtful of the entire system. That's not a sign you're wrong. It's your brain thrashing before surrender. It's addicted to novelty, to short-term dopamine, and it's pushing back against this disciplined monotony. If you push through that phase, a quiet transformation begins. Around week 6, action starts happening almost automatically. No reminders, no self-pushing. You do it because it's simply its turn to happen, like brushing your teeth or drinking water. Discipline is no longer a battle. It becomes a familiar road you walk without thinking. Here's a truth few people are willing to accept. Freedom doesn't come from having more choices. It comes from eliminating them. When you decide in advance what you will do, you free your mind from chaos. Willpower stops bleeding away. All your energy is focused on the one thing that matters: completion. Strength doesn't belong to the one who constantly changes, but to the one who keeps a process long enough for it to carve itself into their being. One path walked long enough will take you farther than every tempting fork. When the question of what to do disappears, discipline no longer needs willpower. It runs itself. Chapter 5. Seamless Practice. Breaking the all-or-nothing mindset. Seamless practice is the thin but decisive line between those who truly change and those who stay stuck. Most failure doesn't come from lack of determination. It comes from a dangerous mindset, all or nothing. When people can't do it perfectly, they choose to do nothing. And in that moment, old habits quietly return and reclaim the space meant for progress. The trap called perfection is far more subtle than it looks. One day you don't have enough time, so you tell yourself, I'll do it properly another day. One moment you feel weak and you compromise, I'll rest today and make it up tomorrow. These statements sound reasonable, even compassionate. But the moment a gap appears, the brain exploits it. It remembers the comfort of familiarity and pulls you back into old patterns. One small crack is enough for the entire discipline system to start breaking. Here's the truth that must be burned in. Practice does not mean perfection. Practice means maintaining flow, not producing an ideal performance. A little movement is still movement. A few simple exercises still send the signal, I am someone who does not quit. 1 minute of meditation is still meditation. It keeps the connection alive. In Eastern thinking, people don't fear a river running low. They fear a river that stops flowing. When you allow yourself to skip today, you're not just skipping an action, you're training your brain that stopping is a valid option. And once that option exists, it will be reused. But when you hold the rule, no matter how small you continue, you close the door to negotiation. The brain learns there is no retreat. People who maintain discipline long-term don't do so because conditions are ideal. They do it because they adapt without breaking principles. Traveling with no gym? They do push-ups in an airport bathroom. Time fragmented? They fragment the workout. Space unsuitable? They adjust the movement, not the commitment. Circumstances change, but the flow never stops. It's this continuity in all conditions that forges identity. Every time you continue, despite doing very little, you reinforce the identity of someone who doesn't quit. You don't need to do a lot to win against yourself. You only need to refuse to disappear from the race. Today's small continuity becomes tomorrow's unshakable strength.
Chapter 6. The Motivation Trap. The Thing That Makes You Lose. There is an enemy beautifully disguised on the path of discipline, so well disguised that most people believe it's an ally: motivation. It sounds noble, inspiring, like the key to all success, but the cold truth is this: motivation is the most unreliable thing you can depend on if you want to change your life. Motivation doesn't come from commitment, it comes from emotion, and emotions fluctuate. Today you're fired up, tomorrow you're tired, bored, empty. If your actions depend on motivation, your progress will rise and fall with your mood, not your goal. People who live on motivation are trapped in one familiar question: do I feel like doing it today? The moment the answer is no, the entire plan collapses. People with systems never ask that question, not because they're stronger, but because they've removed it from their lives. Their actions don't need inspiration to be activated. They're activated by signals. Zen monks don't wake up because of motivation. They wake up because the bell rings. No emotion, no persuasion, no negotiation. The bell doesn't care whether you're tired or energized, happy or miserable. It simply signals that it's time to act. When your life runs on signals and processes, motivation becomes irrelevant. You don't need to feel good to do the right thing. You do the right thing and feelings follow. The problem with most modern people is that they wait for inspiration before acting. But the moment you wait, you hand control of your life to something temporary. One sleepless night, one bad mood, one small disruption. Any of it is enough to destroy your habit, not because you're weak, but because you placed decision-making in the hands of the most fragile thing there is: emotion. Terrifying discipline begins the moment you act despite how you feel.
You don't wait to feel interested. You don't wait to feel ready. You don't wait to feel confident. You act when you're sad. You act when you're tired. You act when you don't want to. And that's what creates a profound shift. You stop being a victim of your inner state. When you act consistently, a paradox appears. Motivation, the thing you once chased, shows up automatically after action. You finish the work, you see progress. Progress creates motivation. But now, motivation is no longer the condition to begin, it's the reward for those who already began.
Chapter 7. The Ego Must Die. What no one tells you about discipline. The ego must die. This is the raw truth no one wants to tell you about discipline. The hardest part of discipline isn't waking up early, training, or working consistently. Those are surface level. The real pain is the moment you face and dismantle the old self, the part of you that constantly seeks comfort, flexibility, and harmless exceptions. That ego doesn't show up as an enemy. It arrives gently, logically. It whispers when you're tired. You worked hard today. Resting is fine. It comforts you in hesitation, just this once. It defends itself with humane-sounding lines. I'm not a machine. These statements aren't false, but they are dangerous, because they open the door to negotiation. And once negotiation begins, discipline has already lost. Zen understands an unbreakable law of the human mind. Every exception you allow today becomes the rule tomorrow. Exceptions don't stay small, they spread. They teach the brain that principles are bendable. And once principles can bend, they will eventually break. Here's the core issue. The old self cannot coexist with extreme consistency. One lives on emotion, convenience, and temporary freedom. The other lives on principles, repetition, and accountability to self. These two identities cannot inhabit the same body for long. One of them must disappear. The moment you choose discipline, you are declaring a breakup. Quiet, undramatic, but final. You stop indulging temporary feelings. You stop looking for ways to soften principles. You no longer ask, should I be flexible today? Because you understand that flexibility with discipline is the most refined form of procrastination. This transformation is uncomfortable. You'll feel rigid, dry, even as if you're losing a part of your freedom. But the truth is, you're not losing freedom. You're trading it for control. The old self craves short-term comfort. The new self seeks long-term self-respect, starting with respect for oneself. Discipline isn't about adding more rules to your life. It's about removing things. Removing the habit of bargaining with yourself. Removing the belief that exceptions are harmless. Removing the version of you that needs motivation in order to act. When those things die, what remains is a simple but solid person, doing what must be done, regardless of emotion. And that's why discipline always comes with loss. Not loss of time, not loss of joy, but the loss of the old self. And it is precisely that death that creates space for a new identity to emerge, one that doesn't need to try to be consistent, because consistency has become its nature. Chapter 8. The Loneliness of Consistency. The path of consistency is quiet. It's not crowded, and it doesn't come with much applause. The moment you begin taking your discipline seriously, a silent truth appears. You will lose certain things, not because you're wrong, but because you've changed. You'll slowly drift away from meaningless conversations that last for hours and lead nowhere. You'll receive less sympathy from those who are used to quitting because your persistence makes them uncomfortable. And most of all, you'll lose the feeling of blending in, that sense of safety where everyone delays, everyone promises, and no one follows through. When you step out of the old rhythm, whispers begin to appear, then turn into familiar questions. Is that kind of life even fun? Try to be more balanced. Don't be so extreme. They sound like advice, but most of the time, they're not really talking about you. They're talking about their own unease. Your presence unintentionally becomes a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look into it. When you wake up early every day,
when you decline unnecessary distractions, when you keep promises to yourself, you remind people around you of a possibility they know they have, but chose not to pursue. That reminder creates discomfort, and to relieve it, they label you extreme, unbalanced, or unable to enjoy life. The truth is this: discipline always creates distance, not because you look down on anyone, but because the frequency of living is changed. Those who seek comfort struggle to walk alongside those pursuing long-term growth. Those accustomed to quitting feel uneasy around someone who consistently finishes. There will be days when you feel lonely, not because no one is around, but because no one is truly walking in the same direction. You'll realize this journey has no crowds, no instant validation, no constant nods of approval. There's just you, your habits, and the road you chose. Yet within that loneliness, a rare strength is forged. You learn to continue without approval. You learn to move forward without being understood. And you learn something essential. Keeping promises to yourself is worth more than being liked. Over time, your social circle will shrink, but it will also become cleaner, quieter, and more real. The ones who remain don't need explanations. They see your actions, and they understand. The new people who enter your life aren't drawn to your words, but to how you live.
Chapter 9. When life is no longer a battle. There's no explosion, no victory cheers, just an ordinary day when you suddenly realize you're no longer forcing yourself. No more dragging your body through tasks, no more internal pushing. Everything flows naturally, as if it had always been this way. A quiet settles in. No excitement, no suffering, no emotional highs followed by exhaustion. Instead, there's stability, steady, rhythmic, aligned. You work when it's time to work. You rest when it's time to rest. No arguing with yourself, no motivation required to begin. Body and mind agree. This state resembles a seasoned swordsman. In the beginning, every strike is effort. The right hand remembers the motion, the left foot its position, the mind tense with fear of mistakes. But eventually, the swordsman no longer thinks about the sword. Each strike appears at the right moment, in the right place, not directed by thought, but distilled from years of practice. Action happens before consciousness can interfere. Zen practitioners experience the same shift. At first, meditation is something you do. Sit upright, control the breath, pull the mind back. But with enough practice, meditation is no longer a separate act. Daily life itself becomes meditation. Walking, standing, eating, working, all carry the same quiet quality. There is no longer a boundary between meditating and not meditating. This is what Eastern philosophy calls effortless action, acting without the sense of acting, not because you're passive, but because you're no longer resisting reality. There's no inner struggle between should and shouldn't. Action flows, light, precise, inevitable, like water finding its path. At this point, discipline is no longer a force you strain to summon each day. It's no longer something you use to push yourself forward. Discipline becomes like a heartbeat. You don't think about it, yet it's steady and reliable. You're no longer proud of being disciplined, nor afraid of lacking motivation. Motivation becomes unnecessary. Strangely, when life stops being a battle, effectiveness increases. You no longer waste energy on resistance. You stop burning yourself with emotional extremes. Focus deepens. Decisions sharpen. The mind lightens. Achievement appears as a natural consequence, not a prize to be fought for. This state isn't for those chasing constant excitement. It's the state of maturity, where you no longer need to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. You simply live in the rhythm forged over time.
Chapter 10. The Point of No Return. There comes a very quiet moment. No fireworks, no grand declaration, but it splits your life in two. It's the day you realize something that surprises even you. Quitting has become harder than continuing. Not because the path is easier, but because you are no longer the same person. This change doesn't come from a single breakthrough. It's built from hundreds, thousands of small actions repeated, silently, persistently. Every morning you keep your word. Every time you finish the task without motivation. Every day you choose discipline over comfort. Bit by bit, a new identity forms, and the old one loses its place. Eventually, returning to who you once were feels wrong. If you quit, you feel foreign to yourself. You sense that you're acting against something that has become natural. It feels like betraying a forged identity, quiet but deeply unsettling. Here's what matters. You're not stronger in the usual sense. You don't have superhuman willpower. You're not someone who never gets tired. What changed is your standard for living. What used to be acceptable, delay, abandonment, breaking promises to yourself, is no longer tolerable. Not because anyone forces you, but because you've grown accustomed to living in alignment with your word. At this point, discipline is no longer a temporary tool for reaching goals. It doesn't exist just to complete projects or hit milestones. Discipline becomes the foundation of your existence, like breathing, like a heartbeat. You no longer ask, "Should I do it?" because not doing it now feels wrong. Goals may change, circumstances may shift, but how you show up each day does not. You arrive on time. You do what you committed to. You finish your work. No audience, no recognition. You act because this is who you are. At the point of no return, freedom appears in a different form. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom from inner conflict. No more morning debates with yourself, no bargaining with emotions. Life becomes simpler, cleaner, aligned. Many people never reach this point, not because they're incapable, but because they stop too early. They quit just before a new identity has time to form. But once you cross that threshold, going back becomes the hardest thing you could do.
Death and rebirth. Guji was never created to make you a little better, to polish your image or patch temporary weaknesses. It exists to end one version of you and give birth to an entirely different one. Who is that old self? It's the version that lives by fleeting emotions, acts when inspired, and stops when things get hard. The inconsistent self that always believes tomorrow will be different, that next time will be more serious, not because you're flawed, but because you never had a structure strong enough to hold you steady. Guji doesn't scold or comfort. It quietly dismantles the layers of self-justification you've relied on to delay. The death Guji brings is not loud. It doesn't destroy you in a dramatic moment. It happens slowly, through uninterrupted daily practice. Every time you show up on time despite resistance, every time you continue while exhausted, a piece of the inconsistent self is removed. Not painfully, but so thoroughly that returning becomes impossible. Then rebirth occurs, not through grand declarations, but through an undeniable reality. You have become someone who is hard to break, not because you're tougher, but because there's no longer room for negotiation. You don't need motivation to begin or emotion to continue. Action becomes obvious, like breathing. Guji doesn't add new qualities to your life. It removes what never belonged to your strongest nature. When the excess disappears, hesitation, procrastination, belief in exceptions, what remains is a person who is simple, clear, and resilient. You no longer ask who you are. Your daily actions answer for you. This rebirth isn't dramatic, but it is permanent. Once you've lived long enough within the Guji system, the old self has nowhere to return. You may get tired, you may slow down, but you don't collapse. You may face disruption, but you don't lose the rhythm you've established. That is the deepest meaning of Guji. Not becoming perfect,
but becoming unbreakable. When the inconsistent ego dies, a new person is born, quiet, grounded, and strong enough to walk all the way to the end of the path they chose.